In the silent heart of the Tenere Desert, where dunes rise like frozen waves beneath an endless sky, lies a fossilized riverbed, its channel carved into stone by water that has not flowed here in 10,000 years. At its edge, a lone acacia tree stands sentinel over cracked earth, roots gripping ancient sediment, now bone-dry and wind-scoured. The land around it is still for a breath too long, the kind of silence that remembers sound. Satellite imagery reveals the truth beneath. Faint, meandering lines etched into the desert floor, veining northward toward what was once an inland sea. These are not figments, but the remnants of a network of rivers, now buried under millennia of sand and time, that fed vast paleolakes, where fish swam and herds grazed in green plains, long since erased by shifting winds and changing skies. The shift began slowly. Monsoons that once swept across North Africa now faltered. The rains retreated northward, the great river systems dried to dust-filled trenches. Yet traces remain, not just in satellite lines, but in layers of sediment beneath dunes, in ancient stone tools scattered like dropped thoughts along what were once riverbanks, fossilized fish scales, animal bones embedded in clay, and the faint outlines of shorelines preserved under wind-blown sand, all point to a time when this desert was not desert at all, but a land alive with water, pulse by pulse. This is not myth. It is geology speaking through time. The Sahara once knew rivers that ran where no river now dares to dream. Rivers born of monsoon winds and summer storms, sustained by climates long gone, and beneath the stillness of today's sand lies a memory written in stone, a world that was green, flowing, inhabited, and then lost. Beneath the endless dunes of the Sahara, stretching from the Atlantic coast to the Nile Valley, lies a secret written in stone and sediment, proof that this was once a land of rivers, lakes, and grasslands. 10,000 years ago, an ancient monsoon system pulsed northward across North Africa, carrying moisture deep into what is now one of Earth's most arid zones. The Sahara was not always a wasteland. It was a vast savanna, threaded with flowing rivers that carved their way through the stone like veins in skin. These were no fleeting streams. Evidence from satellite imagery reveals networks of paleochannels, ancient riverbeds stretching hundreds of kilometers, now buried beneath wind-blown sand and time. At that moment, humanity was undergoing its own transformation. The last ice age had passed, and for a brief window of climatic stability, the region became habitable. People flocked to this greener world, hunter-gatherers who followed game across open plains, living in settlements near lakes that shimmered under sunlit skies. Archaeological remains show their presence, stone tools shaped with care, rock art depicting antelope and cattle, even signs of domesticated animals emerging from wild herds. The landscape supported life in a way it cannot today, yet this flourishing was not eternal. The monsoon system gradually weakened, its rhythm disrupted by subtle shifts in Earth's orbit and atmospheric circulation. Rainfall diminished slowly at first, then collapsed into the dryness we know now. As rivers dried up and lakes shrank, populations were forced to adapt or move. The Green Sahara became a corridor of migration as people followed retreating water sources toward more reliable climates along river valleys and coastlines. What remains beneath the desert is not just geology, it is memory, a record etched in sediment layers, visible through satellite scans and borehole samples, that tells of a world transformed by climate change, of life thriving where only sand now sings in the wind. Beneath the endless dunes of the Sahara lies a world long forgotten. its contours revealed not by maps, but by patterns written in light and stone. The evidence is scattered across continents and centuries, pieced together through technologies that see beyond human vision. Satellite imagery captures the subtle gradients in terrain, revealing ancient riverbeds etched into the desert floor like fossilized veins. These linear formations, invisible to the naked eye, align with known drainage patterns of long extinct rivers, evidence not imagined but observed. Beneath these surface traces lie paleolakes, vast basins now dry and cracked, their former shores marked by terraces and sedimentary rings. Geochemical analysis of lake beds shows layers rich in organic material, pollen, and diatom remains, fossils that speak to a time when water teemed beneath the sun. Radiocarbon dating of these materials anchors them in time, placing them within a window when monsoon rains swept across North Africa, far beyond today's arid boundary. Excavations at sites like Gobero in Niger have uncovered human remains nestled among stone tools and animal bones, proof not just of water, but of life thriving where none survive now. The careful stratigraphy of these burial grounds tells a story of people who lived beside lakes that vanished over millennia. Their presence confirms the Sahara was once habitable, not merely theorized. Climate models based on ocean core samples show shifts in monsoon intensity and position, changes that correlate precisely with the timing of river formation and lake expansion. These data are not conjecture. They come from deep sea sediments laid down over thousands of years, preserving a continuous climate record. Each line of evidence stands independently. Satellite patterns match terrestrial formations, which align with biological and geological remains. The convergence is compelling. What was once dismissed as myth now rests on layers of science too consistent to ignore. This is not memory or legend, but the slow, silent testimony of Earth itself. They rose before the sun, walking barefoot across cool grasses that brushed their ankles like whispers. The air was thick with scent, damp earth, wild mint, the faint musk of animals moving through reeds. Water was not a question here. It was breath itself. A woman knelt by the riverbank, dipping her hands into clear water, drawing up handfuls to cool her face and fill her gourd. She carried it home on her head, balanced with quiet precision, each step measured against memory, each rhythm tied to the seasons that had shaped in their days for generations. Her children played near a cluster of acacia trees, chasing lizards across patches of sun-baked soil. The men were already working the fields, sowing seeds into dark earth, fingers moving like roots through loam. They planted in straight lines, not for order's sake, but because they knew when the rains would come and how far their feet could walk to reach water before it vanished again. Their homes were low shelters of woven reed and mud, roofed with palm fronds. A fire burned inside, crackling under a clay pot where millet simmered over coals. The scent rose like prayer. They ate together on the ground, hands passing bowls made from animal hide or pressed earth, each meal a small act of survival balanced against time. They spoke in quiet tones, watching the sky more than each other's faces. If clouds gathered too fast to the west, they would know storms were gathering, but not enough rain. They feared droughts that crept slowly like shadows at noon. Their children learned early where to find shade, which grasses held water when dry, how to read ripples in a stream after a night's wind. They moved with care, not because the land was empty, but because it was alive and fragile. They did not own the earth. They belonged to it. And though their lives were shaped by rivers long vanished beneath sand, every step they took, every hand that held water or pressed grain into fire, it was part of a story still written in soil, in breath, in memory. The central truth of the Sahara's transformation lies not in its desiccation, but in its memory, written in ancient riverbeds now buried beneath dunes, their courses revealed by satellite swaths that cut across an otherwise featureless expanse. These are not imagined rivers, nor mythic tributaries. They are real channels carved into the bedrock millennia ago, filled with water during a time when monsoon rains swept northward from equatorial Africa, fed by a climate system now dormant. The shift was not gradual, though it unfolded over centuries, but profound. An environmental pivot that redefined the fate of life across the continent. When the rains retreated, so did the lakes, the grasslands, and with them, the people who lived on them. What remains is not just absence, but a fossilized hydrology, its contours preserved in the sand. This was no mere seasonal fluctuation. It was a systemic collapse of climatic balance. Monsoon systems weakened as Earth's axial tilt shifted, altering solar radiation patterns and weakening the atmospheric circulation that once drew moisture into the region. As rainfall diminished over generations, what had been a network of interconnected paleolakes began to dry in sequence. First the shallow basins, then the rivers that fed them. The retreat wasn't uniform. Some areas held water longer than others, but eventually the entire system fractured under prolonged aridity. Yet this was not simply an environmental tragedy, it was also a profound human turning point. As the land turned inward, populations did not vanish in silence. They migrated. They followed the dwindling waters, pressed toward more stable environments, into river valleys that retained moisture, along coastlines where sea air brought mist and life, or eastward into the Nile corridor. The movement reshaped not just geography but culture. Languages evolved, settlements reorganized, and new patterns of survival emerged from the ruins of a green past. This is the core dynamic. The Sahara did not become empty. It was emptied by nature's slow withdrawal and then repopulated by people who learned to survive its return. The rivers are gone, yes, but their legacy flows still in human memory, in stone tools left at ancient lake margins, in the very way we understand resilience. The shift began not with a storm, but with silence, first in the wind's breath, across grasslands, then in the quiet of riverbeds that no longer carried water. Satellite imagery reveals networks of paleochannels sunken like old veins beneath sandstone and dunes, their meandering forms speaking of flow once sustained by monsoon rains far to the south. But as climate patterns reorganized, those rains grew erratic, less frequent, less intense. The great atmospheric conveyor that had drawn moisture northward from equatorial zones began to falter. Evidence from lake sediments tells a story not of sudden collapse, but of slow exhaustion. In some places, lakes shrank in stages. Water levels dropped over centuries, their margins marked by ancient shorelines now buried beneath sand. Trees and grasses receded inward toward shrinking oases, then vanished entirely. The soil, once rich with organic deposits from seasonal flooding, began to lose its cohesion, its fertility drained not only by drought, but by the absence of regular replenishment. There was no single tipping point that turned a green savanna into an arid plain. Instead, a feedback loop emerged. As vegetation diminished, so did evaporation and cloud formation. With less rain came more bare ground exposed to wind erosion. The desert's edge advanced not in a wave, but in creeping waves of dust. slowly reclaiming the land. Human settlements adapted, some migrated toward remaining water sources, others built terraced fields in ravines or dug deep wells into buried aquifers. But as the climate continued its drift away from moisture, even these strategies faltered. The great river systems that had once sustained life across thousands of square kilometers became fossilized channels, their stories written only in sediment layers and satellite shadows. It was not a catastrophe so much as a transformation, a slow exhalation of an ancient breath, where the rhythm of water failed to keep pace with the turning earth. We can trace the change piece by piece, from lake beds to dune fields, from seasonal flows to permanent silence beneath shifting sands, and yet, even now, we do not know if it was drought or tectonic tilt that first disrupted the monsoon's reach, whether the sky failed first or the land itself began to change its face. The grand narrative of the Green Sahara, of rivers flowing where sand now lies, of lakes that once lapped at stone tools and ancient hearths, is grounded in evidence. Satellite images revealing subterranean riverbeds, paleolakes preserved in geological strata, pollen buried beneath dunes. Yet even as we map this lost world, uncertainty persists beneath the surface. One persistent myth is that the Sahara was uniformly green, lush savannas stretching from the Atlas Mountains to the Nile Valley. The reality is more complex. The region experienced patchy greening, with wetter corridors and arid pockets coexisting across millennia. Some areas saw monsoon rains for centuries. Others remained dry even during peak pluvial phases. The distribution of lakes and rivers was not uniform, but shaped by regional geology and local topography. What looks like a continuous river system on satellite imagery may be multiple disconnected flows or seasonal channels that filled only under specific conditions. Another oversimplification is the idea that climate change alone caused the desert's rise, while shifts in Earth's orbit altered monsoon patterns over thousands of years. It was likely a cascade. Declining rains weakened vegetation cover, leading to soil erosion and reduced moisture recycling, feedback loops that accelerated aridification. But how quickly this unfolded remains debated. Was it a slow, millennia-long fade, or did some regions dry abruptly due to tipping points in atmospheric circulation? And while we have found human settlements along ancient shorelines and buried riverbeds, the full story of migration and adaptation is still piecemeal. We know people lived near lakes. There are tools, shelters, but how many families thrived on these waters? How did they move as water sources vanished? The evidence suggests resilience, but also abandonment, with some groups vanishing from the record entirely. Above all, we must guard against romanticizing this era. It was not a paradise. The climate fluctuated violently, droughts returned without warning, and though rivers once flowed where dunes now rise, their existence does not mean that life in the Sahara's green phase was easy or enduring. We see only fragments, echoes of water on stone and satellite data, but even within these traces, much remains hidden beneath time's silence. Beneath the endless dunes and shifting sands, something persists. More than memory, more than myth. The rivers that once carved through the Sahara did not vanish without a trace. Their buried courses remain in the contours of the earth, revealed now in satellite data as faint lines etched across arid plains, like ancient calligraphy written in stone and sand. Paleolakes lie beneath the surface, ghost basins where water stood for millennia, their shores marked by calcified rings, their sediments whispering of rains long gone. What endures is not just the landscape, but the rhythm of transformation itself. The slow unravelling of an environment that was once alive with seasonal floods and permanent wetlands. These rivers were not fleeting dreams. They were arteries of life, sustaining herds, enabling travel, drawing people into vast networks across what we now call the desert. And when the monsoon shifted, when rainfall retreated northward, season after season, the rivers slowed, then stilled. But here is what endures most, the fact that this world was not always one of scarcity and silence, that humans adapted to it, thrived in it, walked its shores, lived beside its lakes, painted their stories upon rock shelters now buried beneath dunes. The resilience wasn't only in nature, it was in people who followed water as if it were breath. And so the story lingers not in ruins, but in continuity, the way some cultures speak of a time when the land breathed, or how certain place names echo older waters. It is not just about climate change, it's about what happens when an entire world changes beneath your feet while you are still standing on its surface. We remember this not to mourn the past, but to understand that every desert was once green, and that nothing endures forever, not even silence. And in that quiet truth, we find a kind of peace. Change is inevitable, and life persists where it can, sometimes hidden beneath dust, always seeking water.